So thank you everybody for joining. We are talking to Sashi Moorman and Raj Parr. Sashi is, they're longtime business partners. Sashi is the managing partner at Domaine de la Côte at Sandy, Evening Land, and together with his wife at Pietro Sassi. Raj is also at Domaine de la Côte Sandy, Evening Land, and has also launched a new project, Feeling Farms, which he'll talk about a little bit later. And like us, they are both very passionate about community and wine in all of its aspects, and also interested in the power of tech to solve some of the wine world's challenges. And they have graciously agreed to share some time with us, and I'll be working those themes into my questions. I will also make sure to leave plenty of time for your questions, so please drop them in the chat, and Sarah and I will parse them as best as we can. So Sashi, maybe talk to us a little bit about your journey into the wine world, and maybe you can comment on how community has been a part of bringing you deeper into that world, because it hasn't been the most traditional journey, and you and Raj are both fairly or unfairly called out as innovators in the California wine scene, if not the global wine stage. And we'll get to that one later. But maybe your entry into the wine world and the impact of community on that.
Yeah, and I'll just speak a little bit to Raj too, since obviously I know his history really well, and when he gets on, we can just get started where we get started with him. So yeah, both Raj and I don't have any formal education in winemaking or viticulture. We came to the wine industry, really as people who are just passionate about wine. Raj studied cooking at CIA in upstate New York, and funny enough, basically at the very same time I was going to Vassar College. Obviously I didn't run into him at that time period in our lives, but we were both pursuing very different educations and careers at that point. I went on to cook professionally in New York City, and that's really where I fell in love with wine. And New York City is, I think, probably the best place in the world to discover wine. There's just so many restaurants and so many wine shops and so many resources. As a young person who's interested in wine, I just can't imagine a better place in the world where there's so many wines from all over the world converging in one place with so many passionate people who are interested and want to educate and share. So that community is very strong. It's still very strong today, obviously. And I think it's we don't really think of like a capital of wine globally, but I would volunteer that New York is probably the capital for wine globally, just because of the kind of the indiscriminate appreciation for wines from all over the world.
I'm waiting for the chat to blow up with comments from Bordeaux and elsewhere, but actually, MJ is just saying he said that on his podcast. Look, without taking sides, because I lived in the States for many years and also in Europe for at least for much longer. I certainly think the degree to which the New York wine world is welcoming, and I think in general, maybe a little bit in contrast in some ways to the European wine world, is a little bit more accessible. I don't want to say less snobby because that's a judgment-laden term, but more welcoming to anybody who wants to step in at any level, I think is phenomenally cool. So I will definitely give that a prop. Is there any part of that community or any one that stands out for you? Like, we often talk about wine, this aha moment with a bottle or with the wine, but was there a place that just feels like your wine home in that kind of New York journey and entry path?
I mean, for me, it was just very personal. It was where I was working. I worked for, at the time, very young man, Jonathan Rapp, and he was extremely passionate about wine. but both from like a gustatory perspective and also from a academic perspective. So there was always a lot of study. So we would drink a wine and then we would study, read about it. And so that, I think that really shaped my approach to wine, both from a consumer's perspective and from a person in the industry. I think, you had kind of talked about New York is special to me for the wine community because Europe still has a prejudice against California and Oregon wines. In its natural, but I think that something that I've come to really hold very dear to me, and I think that Raj feels very much the same way, is there's a unique quality to being a California, Oregon, New World winemaker, and that's that we absolutely have a tremendous amount of curiosity, and we have free spirit. There's enormous amount of investment, ingenuity, and really what I think is most exciting is it's discovery, because in the New World, outside of Europe, you still have the opportunity to discover not only new vineyards and new wines, but whole new appellations. And I think that that's something that is not a big part of the conversation in wine, because it takes such a long time for a wine appellation, a winery to establish itself. But I think that if we just all try and project a little bit and give California and Oregon and all the other parts of the world that are new to wine 800 years that Burgundy has, just imagine. You can't even imagine how diverse and special and complex and incredible these wine regions will be in the future.
So that's an awesome seg to my second question, which is the stuff that you're pioneering in California, or a part of a group of people, because I know you and Raj both feel like you're not doing it alone, but there's a great kind of supportive community of folks like-minded, obviously doing different things and experiences. But what were your inspirations, and do you see that pathway accelerating because of a globalizing world and because of technology?
I think that technology, it has this, 20 years ago, we couldn't imagine having a discussion like this with people from all over the planet, converging into like one, space. And so I think that wine is something that is shared. People in the wine community love to share their recent discoveries, wines that they've been holding on to for a long time and want maybe a little bit of advice as to when would be the best time to drink it, or what other people's impressions have been. So technology has this tremendous opportunity to increase more communication, more transparency, more of that kind of sharing ability. And I think that is that will transform wine. I also think that the biggest benefit for me right now as a producer, as a business owner in the wine space, is for a long time it's been very, very difficult, Raj, to get the connection between the consumer and the winemaker. There's a long history of a lot of people in the middle of that pathway, both from a commerce perspective and also just from like an information perspective. And so if technology can bring consumers closer to the people who are actually making the wines, that not only strengthens the relationship between, in terms of an appreciation for that wine, but also just the transparency. I think you're going to see a lot of ideas maybe transform when there's this much transparency, when people are really able to ask questions, get answers on a real-time basis.
how important, so first of all, thank you, Raj, for joining. Do not turn on your camera. I saw you in the car. It looked like you were driving. So I do not want to be responsible for any Raj Parr injuries or those to others. So, and thanks a lot for joining. I know you're on your way to a transatlantic flight. We really appreciate it. Just to do one follow-up and then I'll ping one over to Raj. Sashi, how important is it to you to keep those middlemen involved while still getting closer? And because I know there's a lot of disintermediation, and that's a lot of what tech is supposed to do and talk about, but at the same time, community is community, right? And it's about building more. And to me, we don't see it here at Club dVIN as exclusive or cutting someone out. We see it as adding more threads and using tech to enable that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, tech has been disruptive to every single industry on the planet, and we have to imagine that it will be disruptive to the wine industry as well. It depends on all of us as a community, because we are a small community, to work together to promote what we really love, which is what we want particularly young, undercapitalized vignerons to be able to get their wines out into the world and for people to know about them and enjoy them. That to me is what technology can do that basically nothing else can. And that just benefits everybody. And if everyone really has a true love for wine and its diversity and being able to appreciate wines from all these different places, from a producer that only makes 1,000 cases a year to someone who makes 100,000 cases a year, that should be welcomed, in my opinion.
Totally agree. And we didn't talk a lot about this, but part of the dVIN roadmap is enabling effectively young vignerons to do primeur drops themselves in order to pre-finance some of the stuff that they want to do, supported by folks like you and Raj. So that's a further conversation, but 100% philosophically aligned there. And Raj, I promise there's a method to my madness in asking this question, because it's all going to be about multiple threads connecting, but bear with me for one. Raj, I wanted to ask you, you guys have been pioneering some cool stuff in California, from varietals to the geographies you're playing in, dry farming, rootstocks. I'm not going to buzzword you to death. I'd rather you speak in your own words. But the thing I want to ask you is it all starting to come together? And is there a philosophical thread that runs through the experimentation that you're doing, even if it's just establishment plus anti-establishment? Or how is it coming together in your heads now that you've been doing this for a good few years now together with Sashi?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it together since starting in really 2006 or 7, and then experimenting since then, and then kind of really, putting it out there starting maybe in 2010, 11. And I guess we never realized how many changes we've made since we started this until the pandemic, when you sit down and we actually, you're sitting and, we all probably drank too much during the pandemic. And, I must say I revisited many of the wines we had made in early years, and you sit back and look back and think, wow, this is like where we were and where we came from. And today it's very different. And, I'm sure if Sashi opens a 2003 Pietra Sassi next to a 2017 Pietra Sassi or even 2019 Pietra Sassi, it'll be completely like day and night. And that's just how we are. Last night I opened a bottle of 2011 Domaine de la Côte, and I was like, wow, this is crazy to have this wine. It's not that far from the wine we make today, but the process was very far away. And it was so, and now we just know the path, and the path can deviate and we can make changes, but it took a good decade to figure out just which path to choose.
I'm definitely not going to open a nature versus nurture conversation, but that you did spark that one. We'll save that one for another chat. But I want to tie a comment Sashi made to what you just said, Raj. He was talking about the reception of New World wines in the old world. And I want to ask, how did the community, both locally and internationally, see your initial efforts, and how did that evolve as you went on your journey? And I'm thinking in my head is a little bit the like second Great Judgment tasting, although that didn't end up being a Great Judgment. But that's a funny aside. But I you don't need to comment on it. I'm just kind of using that as a bit of an anchor of the from to, right?
Yeah, no, this was it kind of, I think in the beginning, most of the domestic, wine drinkers kind of rejected the idea of Domaine de la Côte, and somewhat soundly in a way, because I used to go to wine shops, and I remember one wine shop in Austin, and the wine bar is like, "Why should I buy your wine? Your wine doesn't taste like American wine." I'm like, okay, makes sense. There's a lot of people who didn't embrace it. So, even today, Domaine de la Côte is, I think we probably export more than we sell in the US. And that's just because it timed out when I was traveling to research on my book. I always had some wine with me. I showed some, we opened, 10, 15 countries in Europe, and that's just how it happened. So we were kind of not embraced by the local community. I'm not sure even today we are really living in Lompoc, but so I think in a way, Domaine de la Côte is more known internationally than it is domestically, and that's just the way it happened in the beginning, because there weren't that many people making kind of lower alcohol whole cluster Pinot Noir back in 2009 and 2010. So, kind of it's an interesting. Now, of course, the domestic market wants more wine, and we're like, sorry, they allocated to UK or Scandinavia, and you can't change allocations because we only, we have the set amount of land, and we make a set amount of wine. So,
Is it?
That's how it is.
Is it changing faster now, that acceptance rate, or is it is what it is, right? Because
no, definitely changing. No, I mean, right now it's also we have good partners and distributors and stuff. So definitely changing rapidly. If he had released Domaine de la Côte today, as opposed to in 2013, it'd be a different story. But definitely changing for sure. Now there's more producers who have the same kind of idea.
So just to link those, because that's definitely historically was one of your challenges. If you pause now and you kind of look forward, what are some of the biggest disruptions that you face? I mean, from global warming, younger consumers drinking less, accessibility and crazy prices, and aftermarket, diversity in the wine world. You can take it anywhere. What are your kind of top 2 or 3? And are there areas in those top 2 or 3 where you think tech can help us move along faster?
I mean, I would say disruption that's a harsh word. I don't use that too often. but there are like certain. I mean, yes, as you said, connecting with our consumer, because we don't exactly know. We know somewhat who they are, but not entirely. To understand that through tech would be the biggest advantage for us to connect with them. Because we think of like us who made this wine and created this brand, and for us, people who drink the wine, we want to know who they are and we want to connect with them. If you're making only 20, 30,000 bottles of wine total, and I love to know who's drinking it, what they think, are they drinking it young, are they aging it, and it's all over the place. I think tech can really help that. That's what really would be the most important part for us as a producer, so we can kind of cater to the needs of ask questions, and I think with these tokens and tastings, I think it's going to do that, and we're excited to be a part of that.
Sashi, you have anything else that's on that list, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I think Raj and I really discovered with Domaine Lacote is really the power of just the consumer, not the tastemakers, not the most important people in the wine industry, just the consumers. Because definitely in the European markets, Raj obviously did a lot of work there promoting the wines, but what we've seen since then is the groundswell has come from just the consumers. The consumers like tasting the wine, buying the wine, realizing that it costs a fraction of Burgundy and has so much of like complexity and what they love about Pinot Noir, but it's new and different. And that has been so like, that has just been so invigorating. And what I hope tech does is empowers more consumers to realize that they do have the strongest voice as a collective force. They don't as an individual, because their platform is not as large as a wine critics, but collectively, they can absolutely change the market. They can change everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And wine and tech aren't naturally seen as coming together. In some ways, they've been, worlds apart as industries, and the wine world has been slow to adopt it. Consumers are obviously different. Do you see that as an issue, like getting the wine world broadly, not just, kind of the consumers who are more open to it? Do you see that as an issue of getting them to embrace technology more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so the wine world has been trying to embrace tech for a while. And I think where we understand now where the shortcomings are. Like, it's really boring to watch someone taste a wine and talk about it. Like, that's just like super boring, like, because you're not tasting it and experiencing it with them. And it's not like a cooking show where you're like watching someone make something and there's like joy and pleasure from that. And so I think we have to understand that there are limitations, but the great opportunity is information. The wine world is very opaque. I mean, it's very hard to find information about a particular wine. I mean, and if we can change that, if we can create more transparency, I think that's really the application of tech and wine.
So we've got a question in which segues nicely from the Q&A, which is how do NFTs work with wine? I'll ask you the question more broadly, because I know you've been approached by a bunch of people about this. And then once you answer, I'll do a 30-second spiel on digital corks and tasting tokens, just so people know what we're trying to do together on it. And then we can go from there. But so NFTs and wine, you've been thinking about it, obviously. The market's exploding. You've seen a bunch of stuff happening out there. You've been approached by a number of different players. And you've talked about the value really being in the data. What do you see people doing out in the NFT and wine world, and what do you think is going to happen? And obviously the setup was the previous question about, is the wine world willing to adopt tech?
Raj, do you want to go first, or?
You go, Sashi. Okay. Yeah, this is all much newer to me.
I think that, there's obviously the issue of provenance, and, to kind of touch on something you brought up earlier about, challenges that we face, like younger consumers. Wine is first and foremost about pleasure, but it also has this longevity piece to it. And I think that makes it very hard for young people to embrace wine, because I know myself, as I'm getting older, there's just a greater appreciation for things that last longer than a lifetime. And millennials are about me and older people are about us, culture. And so wine has this incredible ability to let us participate in something cultural that is more than a generation. And I think that that is something that ties into the provenance and why following wine, cellaring wine, drinking older wine will always be an important part about wine. And I think tech, through really certifying and authenticating provenance and where wine has been, also just like who's had the wine. I mean, I think we really celebrate like, oh, this wine came direct from the cellar, and that is really interesting and great. But it also would be interesting to know, like, oh, like who are the people that touched this bottle? Like, how many people have owned this bottle of wine before I consumed it? And if there's a community that could be tapped into, that are part of that, like, you know, that chain of custody, that would be really, really interesting. It would really create this very dynamic exchange of like, oh my God, like I used to own that wine, I sold it. How is it? Like, is it great? I wish I hadn't sold it. And then specifically to NFTs, I really think that there can be like, you know, the what is it? The, you know, crowdfunding, the ability to participate as a very small investor in new wine projects or even older wine projects or families that are trying to resurrect their domains, is a really interesting and exciting opportunity. Because I think what we ultimately want as wine consumers is we don't want investors to control the wine. We don't want them to control how it's made, what it's priced at, who sells it, who gets it. We really want the vigneron to control that. And I think that NFTs may be a pathway to allow, once again, consumers, the power of the consumer to really empower the craftsperson to do what they want to do, and not be answering to shareholders, but be answering to people who are really invested in their journey and what they want to do.
And you and I have talked about this a good bit. So maybe it's a good segue because we're getting some questions about the NFTs and how it's all going to work. Oh, by the way, you got some flack about the millennials are about me and older people are about us statement. I don't want to speak for you. I think you were speaking to the stereotype, but if you want to think about how you're going to respond to Josh's comment about that, Josh, I don't disagree with you. I'm trying to forgive Sashi his gray hairs. I have limited hair, so I can be neutral on the subject. While Sashi is considering his rebuttal, let me just describe 30 seconds on NFTs, our perspective on wine and NFTs, to Jana's question in the Q&A. So we're launching 3 NFTs. One is a membership NFT, which is membership to the club, tradable, transferable, and that's just because we want to know who people are. We want to limit the totality of the membership for the experiences and be able to control it to a good degree. And third, because it's a way to raise funding for the startup as well. Because we also want to be, like Sashi just said, independent of a bunch of VC or investor interests and control our own destinies. And we've actually reserved a considerable bit of the equity for the winemakers as a block, 40% of it, because we believe that that's the right way to do things. Then there's a digital cork, which is the digital twin of the physical object. And there are tasting tokens. The digital cork is all about the stuff Sashi already talked about. There's a lot of people doing that: authentication, provenance, chain of custody, smart contract for resale, and remonetization isn't happening in all those cases, but that's built into ours. So you imagine further down the line, if you want to trade it directly and sell the bottle, you can now just sell it on OpenSea or any marketplace. And you can set your own price premium as a winemaker for it, and you only have to pay transaction costs on that marketplace. with full provenance established, as opposed to going through an auction house who's going to take a bigger cut. And the auction houses are needing to deal with this anyway, because it's happening in the art world, and a new norm is being established for that whole thing. So back to my question about not wanting to cut people out, I don't want to cut them out, but I do want them to change their behaviors and play, a value-added role. And then the third thing, which I think is the most interesting thing, and it gets to Sashi's point on wine as experience, is the tasting token. And the idea is the tasting token is both an incentive to tell us that you've consumed it and to stay on the chain, but it's also something you can share with people and bring them into the broader wine world. And it's an NFT. It's going to look beautiful. You're going to be able to display it however you want. You're going to be able to look through your memories the way that you want, which is super cool. And that exists in the metaverse, and is powerful. But to Sashi's point, from a winemaker's perspective, that's also the gateway to the data. Sashi now gets to see who you shared that bottle of Sandy with, and where you had it, and whatever else you want to record and share. Was it positive? Was it negative? What else were you drinking with it? When you drank it, all of that stuff will be recorded and will be great value to the winemakers. But then he can see, hey, you've had 15 tasting tokens across my holdings in the past half year. I want to reach out to you and create an experience for you, or I want to invite you to an experience that we've already created. And that's how we see tasting tokens evolving, as bringing that community together through the data, but in a way that's value added to all players. So hopefully I've answered that question. I just got a question, what's a tasting token? I think I just said that. So literally it's an NFT Polygon chain, which has all the metadata you want to add to it and the metadata that the winemakers want to put on it. And you can go check them out on the Club dVIN website, but right now it's visual and beautiful, and we'll continue to evolve it as we get feedback. But it's basically an authentication. It's a proof of experience token that is only attached to that digital cork. So if you have a tasting token, I know that whoever minted it was the person who owned that bottle and chose to share it with you. Cool. So that's the question, hopefully answered. Sashi and Raj, if you guys want to comment on this, as you've been approached by various players who are kind of trying to do this, has the community aspect been far enough in the forefront for you? Or is that something that you think, is relatively new in the thinking of the whole kind of NFT coming into wine space?
I think maybe it's something new. I don't really. I have to see it to understand it. I haven't spent that much time, so I'm not as. I don't know that much about it yet.
Got it. Sashi?
I think it's new. I think people are, I think that there's a general conception that blockchain technology is for monetizing something. There's obviously such a strong connection with the currencies. And so I think people maybe don't understand that it's, it has in the wine space, it can, or in any space, it can have a really different application. One of like either authenticating experience, tastings that can then be shared. And the value of that is not really like, oh, look at how many tokens I have. It's more about sharing information, about participating in a larger community that appreciates and wants to know your thoughts. I think that the ability to, Sandy is collaborating very closely with an organization here locally called the White Buffalo Land Trust. And I know there's been some discussions that you've been having, that I've been having with them the idea of being able to like co-sponsor or like participate in the stewardship of something that is to be preserved for forever. I mean, it would be the ideal, so that it's not a monetary, there's not a benefit financially, but there's a great benefit to you in terms of your connection to what that project is trying to do. And it's your way of being able to support them and be part of a community that is dedicated to that. And I think that is a really amazing opportunity that NFTs can provide, because I think we all, wine is obviously a connection to a piece of ground. And if we can bring that connection to more people through NFTs, that's a marvelous thing.
We've got an interesting question. It's just, how is that different than Delectable or any other wine review community, which I find fast, and it's one up. So I think if the difference isn't clear, I probably haven't done a good job explaining it. But the difference is authentication and depth, and the fact that you're getting that data back to the wineries. So you have all of the blockchain benefits, because you can post whatever you want on Delectable. I can take a picture of anything. You may as well have said, how is it different than Instagram, right? And that's the whole blockchain layer, plus the fact that the data is going back structurally to the winemakers, and the fact that the tasting tokens are being used to create community. So it wasn't a throwaway comment when I said, if Sashi and Raj see that you've had X number of tasting tokens from their holdings, they can create events. That's actually what the mechanism we're going to use to create the experiences and to bring the community together. So it's really about the depth of engagement. And in theory, somebody could do it if they created a great site, right? The beauty of technology is not that it creates new things, it's that it creates better ways to do the things that you really, really want to do, which is what we're trying to do. I don't know, Sashi, do you want to add anything to the Delectable conversation, or Raj? Sounds like no. Got a question. Can NFTs add value to a bottle? And I will say absolutely, and part of that is the resale and the authenticity in resale, right? I mean, the sour grapes problem, right? That there's every incentive for a reseller to do their best to avoid, let's say, negative authenticity research on scarce bottles, and this is immutable and it's trusted. So it's the same thing as any product. Like, if you have amazing provenance, you're going to have greater value to that bottle. But Sashi, Raj, feel free to jump in.
I think, you know, there's also the idea of I think knowing the history of a bottle of wine has value to it, regardless of its provenance. I think that it's interesting for people. I mean, wine is a commodity that way, and that it leaves a domain in France, and then maybe it goes to London, and then from London it goes to New York, and from New York it goes to a retailer in San Francisco, and then maybe ends up in a cellar in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's just interesting. And I think as we learn more and more, as consumers learn more and more about how wine is sold and moved and where it goes, that's exciting. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's value to knowing that the wine, this particular wine, I mean, I remember Raj told this lovely story about Henri Jaillet, and that when he bottled his wines, he bottled directly from cask. And Raj, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the top portion of the barrel was bottled for the export market, I believe. No, the domestic market, their own domestic market, and the middle of the barrel was bottled for all the direct clients of the domain, because that's what he determined was the best part of that barrel. And then the bottom of the barrel was sold to the export market. And I'm sure that's been okay. And that's such a lovely little bit of like geeky information from Henri Jaillet. And the fact that Raj has had wines of, from different parts of the barrel and knows that they're different. I mean, this is something that, nobody does that anymore, but just as an example, like to know that a wine was maybe sold directly at the domain, maybe because it was sold directly at the domain chose to use less SO2 or maybe didn't filter the wine. And so that there is something slightly different about that particular bottle. And that can be recorded and be appreciated as part of the tasting experience.
Raj, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, no, that's an amazing reality. I mean, one also amazing story is like I was at Mascarello one year and somebody had bought, an older couple knocked the door and they came in and they were like, oh yeah, we had bought this bottle of 67 from your father and we drank it on an anniversary last year and we're bringing the bottle back to you. So it comes back from where it came. Just that, the nostalgic, like that was like the cutest thing I ever seen in my life. They bring back the bottle. I mean, from they drank it in like Miami or something like that, in Florida, and they bring it back to, where the domain was, so they can recycle the bottle back. And that was pretty amazing.
That's a good story. We got a question coming in. Is there any concern with data breach of sensitive consumer information with NFTs? I mean, I'll as a alleged tech guy, answer that. Yes and no. I mean, so as you know, NFTs are 100% transparent, and we're putting these all on public chains. So that is what it is. That said, if you want to, you can kind of do your best to figure out who is associated with any given wallet. But the worst thing that can happen is you find out who's buying what or drinking what, which presumably is something that you'll want to be sharing, at least to some degree, with some people. I think sensitive consumer information isn't embedded in the NFTs, right? So unless you think that somebody knowing how much cryptocurrency you hold in a particular wallet is sensitive, your, let's say, private information is never attached to the NFT. The only thing that's attached to the NFT that's personal data is anything you want to add to it in the form of metadata, videos, pictures, etc., and your wallet address. So no more or less than, kind of any NFT. Cool. I have one more question if nothing else comes in. No, first, I'll ask you guys, is there anything you wish I had asked that I haven't yet? Because we only have a few minutes and I do have one more. So what should I have asked you that I didn't? Too much pressure?
I mean, I suppose, Fan is very new, and so there's going to be a lot of new developments and exciting updates. And I think, I guess I would be curious, like, what are you most excited about that's coming in the pipeline?
Honestly, I'm super excited to see what experiences the winemakers want to bring to consumers and how that interaction plays out. Because my background is a lot in incubators and startups, and we always talk about product market fit and co-creating that, right? Like what you think as a winemaker, what your consumers want, and what they actually do and how they actually behave and respond and engage with your wines and where they have it and how they have it are going to be different. And whether that's 10% different or 80% different, I don't know. But I do know from talking to winemakers and to talking and interacting with drinkers that there's a pretty big gap, right? Like I'm not going to tell stupid stories like Petrus Coke and whatever. I'm not even talking about that. I just mean, and I can tell some stories about fun interactions I've had with winemakers where somebody will, an experienced drinker will say, that's not what your father thought about that wine that he made, which are just absolutely hilarious. But I'm super excited about how through the club and just through better knowledge, we'll come up with even better and different and more interesting ways to engage between winemakers and truly passionate consumers. That's one big one. The other one that I'm really, really interested and excited about is how the next generation, more crypto curious, not necessarily deep in the wine world, how that crowd is going to start to engage differently with wine now that they can step in with much more open door access into that world, and hopefully with less prejudice and less hurdles and less intermediaries in the way. Because I think there's a lot of power in that. And I think the way that you guys have been pioneering a lot of different things has been actually founded on some beliefs that you held and hold as drinkers as to what kind of wines you want to create. And I think more of that is only better for the wine world. Does that make sense? Hope so. And somebody asked, is this wine NFT is kind of like the LinkedIn of the wine product? I've never thought about it that way. More because I see LinkedIn as sort of a place where I guess if you see it as a digital way of authenticating your experience, yes, for sure. But where it goes beyond and community creation, absolutely. I think where it goes beyond is it actually enables you to engage engagement depth and intensity through the tasting tokens and the frequency of those, and really pull all of that data together, which is something that is harder to do from LinkedIn. But yeah, it's actually, now that I think about it more, thanks. That's a good analogy. Thank you, Jermaine. Okay, cool. I think the questions are slowing down. We're 2 minutes from time, and I know Raj has to catch a flight. Where are you going, Raj, by the way? So just so we can snoop on you. Oh wait, Zulema asked a question.
Yeah, I'm heading to the Jura and the Savoie for.
Nice. Regions where you're more welcome than Burgundy, I guess, right?
Oh no, I'm gonna stop in Burgundy for a day. It's hard to even find people in Savoie, for example. Everything is so far away. Even though it's close as the crow flies, but I just got to. I've never been there after pruning, so we just finished pruning here. So I'm just gonna go and see, because the varieties are not something which you see a lot of in California. So I'm just gonna try to learn a few things for next year.
I'm glad you're always learning, and you're trying to do more funky varietals. Hey, Raj, just one thing I totally forgot. Do you want to talk a little bit about Feelin'? Because that's your new project, and not everybody knows about it.
It's been, it's been with us since 2016. We made the wine for Sandi, and then we grafted some stuff at Rajat Parr Wine Club, and then during the pandemic, I I was tired of living in Santa Barbara, and I was like, I gotta, no one's traveling anywhere, so why not give a hand and see how to farm, because that's something I'd never done before. So kind of relocated and just kind of, it's an hour from Lompoc, so it's not too far. It's the other way, except for Santa Barbara was south. So, and we have a bunch of Jura and Savoie varieties. It's small, it's only 11 acres, and just small amounts of wine, and just kind of try to learn and understand more about regenerative farming. That's pretty much it.
And you found some old vines, old roots there, which
well, they're not old. They're not old. They planted the same year as Domaine de la Côte in 07, but they are ungrafted vines. So, and we don't need to irrigate here because there's a creek, just creek around the vineyard. It's totally secluded. It doesn't look like anything else in California. So it's just a little baby canyon in this place where Cambria is not known for fine wine. So, it's good to have just be like a outsider here and just growing some grapes and some apples.
Cool. Good luck with it. When do we get to try the first vintage?
We'll bottle the 21s in the coming months, so they'll be released in September.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for the time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And if people have follow-up questions, we will wing them your way in case we can harass you again to give any answers. But thanks, and have a safe trip, Raj. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, guys.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Yeah,
Very exciting.
it was fun.
Bye-bye.